lot of good for Buddhism, establishing meditation centers around the world. There's a Goenka center here in Perth, I believe, and there's, well, at least there was one, I'm not sure if it's still in operation. And there's a number in Australia, and there's numbers around the world. There's an enormous amount of good for Buddhism and spreading the idea of meditation practice in general. So it's important to get a balanced view. I don't mean to kind of criticize people unfairly, but I think one of the problems, with someone like S.N. Goenka is that he had a kind of one particular angle on which to view meditation, and this is this angle here, that Satipatthana meditation really is about Vipassana. And I think that is a weakness of his system. It is not enough, it is not complete understanding of what it is about. So even though his background, and even though he had a good understanding of the Burmese, he is Indian Burmese, so he grew up in Burma but of Indian descent, and he propagated his meditation centers in particular in India, and later on going to the West. He was not really a professional. He learned the meditation system as a layperson. He was a businessman, and I think his understanding of the suttas was certainly not complete. There was a limitation there, and he only looked really at the Satipatthana sutta. That was the main sutta that he was basing his teachings on. So a very important person. He did a lot of good for Buddhism, but he also helped to propagate certain ideas that I think have been detrimental in the long. Some of the things have been detrimental for a full grasp of the Buddhist path, and this is one of those things. So we need to see this kind of balance here, because the problem is that if you think of Satipatthana as Vipassana, it is very hard to account for what we have seen before, which is this. Satipatthana leads to Samma Samadhi. This is one of the things I've been pointing out a lot already, and doing it again. Because if Satipatthana leads to Samma Samadhi, then you would think that the main thing that Satipatthana does is to calm you down, to make you more peaceful, to make you more at ease. In other words, the main point of Satipatthana from this perspective would be as a samatha practice. Samatha meaning a calming practice, and not a vipassana practice. So in other words, it's almost like a complete change in the way of thinking about Satipatthana, moving from Vipassana, moving to Samatha, or that at least is how it seems initially when you look at this. And this matters, of course, tremendously, because Samma Samadhi is one of the 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. It's something that we have to include in the meditation, otherwise we're not fulfilling the path or that the Buddha taught. So we end up with a very stunted path and with a very problematic understanding of the teachings if we stop at Satipatthana being equivalent to Vipassana in this way. So you can see the problem arising here. So it's a major problem and a big thing, a big issue that we need to take into account. And what is kind of surprising is that even today, after all these years when we have kind of finding the balance a bit more between samatha and vipassana, still it is a fairly common idea that Satipatthana is all about vipassana practice. So this is kind of surprising. There is no link between Satipatthana and vipassana in the suttas. There's difficult to find a single sutta where Satipatthana and Vipassana are mentioned together at all. These are considered quite different things in a sense in the suttas. So they are separated out. So what does that mean in practice? Does it mean that these things are completely different? And not necessarily. There still obviously can be some relationship between them, but it's not a relationship that is spelled out in the suttas. And again, the main reason for that would then seem to be that Satipatthana is leading to samadhi rather than towards vipassana or wisdom. They're never used together, at all. There's never any relationship between them, one causing the other, or the one being equal to the other, or anything like that found anywhere. So what is the difference between Satipatthana and Vipassana? And the difference is that the way to understand the connection between them is that Satipatthana is what we do, is the actual meditation. It is the things that how we apply the mind to a meditation object and whatever. Whereas Vipassana and Samatha, they are the result of that practice. It comes out of the Satipatthana practice. You follow the meditation, and the result is Samatha and Vipassana coming together. So this is an important understanding of Samatha and Vipassana as results. It's kind of fascinating that in the common way that we use the word Vipassana, we always talk about Vipassana meditation. But there is no such thing as Vipassana meditation in the suttas. Nor is there such a thing as Samatha meditation. None of these actually exist. And the reason why they don't exist is because they are results, they are outcomes of the practice. So the word calm is an outcome of the practice. Vipassana, I will talk more later on about what it actually means as a word, but it means something like clear seeing. It's also an outcome of the practice. And they always go hand in hand. There are two sides of the same mental state. A mental state which sees clearly and is calm. These are not really distinguishable. And again, this is going to be one of the main topics of the next workshop, because that is all going to be about Samatha and Vipassana, how they actually work together. So please keep this in mind, because this, I think, it can be a very detrimental view if we understand this in the wrong way, that Satipatthana and Vipassana are the same, because it takes away the whole Samatha component, the whole idea that we're moving towards samadhi. It contradicts basically the main way that Satipatthana is used in the suttas. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Robin.
You were just saying there are two sides of the same mind state.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm close enough. But then I'm sure there's a sutta that talks about you having one followed by the other, or it's the other way around, or it's the two together, or you're confused about some Dhamma question.
Okay,
What's
sure.
What's that about then?
I'll get back to that next time. Are you going to come next time? Yeah. What do you mean? Ooh, maybe. This is the incentive for coming next time. Because next time is going to be all about Samatha and Vipassana. Yeah? And I'm going to bring up that sutta specifically. It's on my list already. So you have to come, Robin. Yeah.
That's why Ajahn was so persistent in not teaching too much on this in this series, in this workshop. Yeah? He's skipping a lot,
Okay.
behind his sleeve.
Yeah.
This question is relating to one of your slides, Ajahn.
Yeah.
Just to clarify that, in that, I think from memory, I think it was there as you developed these four Satipatthana in three ways.
Yeah.
I think, were you referring to as Atapi, Sampajano, Satima as the three ways?
No, I think the three ways are internal, external, both internal and external.
Both internal and external.
Yeah.
Okay, that's clear. And on this one, would it be because that that Satipatthana they relate to as a Vipassana practice because of the breaking down of, like in the Iriyapata Bhavana?
In the what?
Is it called Iriyapata?
Iriyapatas, okay. The kind of postures.
Postures.
And
in that details down, and then the activities like walking, back, sitting, eating, all that, breaking down into areas, and then in the body as well, going into is it possible, just thinking while you were discussing to us, is it possible that that is because of that detail, those detailed expositions, that some teachers have thought this is the Vipassana, this is on Vipassana?
I think the main reason why it is considered Vipassana is because you have the refrain after each exercise, the Satipatthana. It has a refrain. You do this internally, externally, both internally, externally. Then it has you contemplate the arising factors, the ceasing factors, both the arising and ceasing factors, and that part, the contemplation of the arising factors, ceasing factors, that is what people take to be Vipassana, the Vipassana part. All of that we're going to discuss later on. It's coming. But I just want to kind of pace ourselves a little bit so don't go too fast. But that's where, because that is kind of... But the question, of course, then is, well, this is why we want to look at the history of the Satipatthana Sutta and how it has developed and how it is, what is likely to be in the original version given by the Buddha. Yeah.
Ajahn is just whipping up our appetite. He's like telling us the trailer, it's coming, it's coming.
Yeah, this is the samsara. It's kind of like that. It's always promising something more.
Dukkha, Ajahn, dukkha.
Dukkha, yeah. Okay. So let's move on to the next one. Myth number 6. Modern Vipassana is exactly what the Buddha taught. So, yeah, the idea here is modern Satipatthana, modern Vipassana is exactly what the Buddha taught, and this is kind of what you will sometimes hear. And I'll give you some examples of that. Yeah, so here are some examples of how this is expressed. We are very thankful to the Sangha who maintain the purity of the words of the Buddha, and those among them who maintained the practice of Vipassana. Otherwise, it would have been lost long ago. Because of this tradition of ours, we received the practice in its pristine purity, and we are deeply grateful. So this is the idea, that you receive the teaching in its pristine purity from past generations. What do you think when you hear pristine purity? Do you think that's likely? What do you think? Unlikely, yeah. Unlikely, one vote for unlikely from Ananda, yeah. And well, let's look at that in a second. I can't remember what my slides are here anymore, so let me just move on. So here is another one of these ones, yeah. He received the teachings that he taught in the 1950s from Sayagyi Ubakin of Burma in a lineage. Is it how do you pronounce that? Sayagyi? Sayagyi. Okay, so I got it roughly right. In a lineage of teachers descended directly from the Buddha. Goenka never omitted to say that he received the technique from the Buddha through a chain of teachers down to his own teacher. And of course there is some truth to this, yeah, because there is a chain of teachers and the thing obviously has been passed down. But the question is, well, it has been passed down, but is it exactly the same? Has there been some changes on the way? This is kind of an important question. The way it is phrased here, it sounds like the teaching of the Buddha has kind of unadulterated, pristine purity passed down through all the generations, and what you get today is exactly the same. Yeah, there's not an iota of difference. There's no kind of, nothing has been lost at all over all that time. So let's just consider this a little bit, and one of the things about the whole idea of Buddhism is that pristine purity is an impossibility. It contradicts the idea of anicca, of impermanence. Pristine purity implies that something has been kept intact over long periods of time and has exactly the same form as it had a long time ago. But that contradicts anicca. Anicca means that things are always changing, always kind of different. One of the areas we often talk about pristine, we talk about nature being pristine, being intact in a certain sense. But even nature is never really pristine, it's always changing. And if you go far enough back, sure, today we have more pollution than we had before, but if you go back far enough, before a certain point, there wasn't any nature at all. The earth was just a molten globe of of lava, and there was nothing here at all. So that kind of is also pristine purity, but it's not the pristine purity which is particularly interesting. Yeah, you couldn't really do anything with it. So everything is always changing. Yeah, the idea that there is some kind of original, unadulterated state where everything was right is just a misunderstanding of the nature of reality. Things are always changing. Yeah, even the immediate listener to the Buddha would have had to interpret his message. And so you can imagine when the Buddha was speaking, there would have to be a listener. The listener would have been the Sangha, would have been lay people or whoever. And as soon as this is uttered by the Buddha, then the person has to understand it in the correct way. What is the chance of the person understanding exactly what the Buddha taught? Well, it is zero because of different conditioning, different ideas. So the listener already, the moment it was uttered by the Buddha, it would have been received in a slightly unreal way because of the different conditioning of the people. But even prior to that, even the fact that the Buddha has to speak these teachings, the point is, of course, that what the Buddha had was a realization. That realization has then to be transformed into words. But that very transformation of an insight into words is already going to be difficult because words have limits. The insight you have is something completely beyond that anyone ever has had before. So how are you going to express that in words? That words, those words, that language is conditioned by that society. That society is conditioned by experience that people have had before. If you have an experience that no one has had before, how are you going to express that? It's going to be very hard. Yes, the very fact that you have to express it in words means that there's always already going to be a limitation of what you can say. The Buddha also was limited by the language that existed at the time. And then the listener hears it, and the listener kind of gets it slightly wrong. And another listener hears the same message, and here the other listener hears something slightly different. And then the two listeners start to argue with each other. Who is right? I understand it. No, he said this. Well, he meant that. Okay, we better write a commentary about this. That's how the commentaries arose. They came from different understandings of the same teaching. People trying to understand what the word of the Buddha actually meant, because there is no such thing as absolute truth when it comes to words. They are just different interpretations, different ways of hearing the same thing. Regardless of how precise the Buddha was, there was always possible to see different interpretations in these teachings. Then the commentaries start to arise, and then the commentaries have sub-commentaries, and then those commentaries again, and it's on and on it goes. And what I'm teaching now is kind of the latest iteration of commentary. So what I'm saying is the most dodgy of all. It's kind of the last kind of commentary on the subject. So this is kind of interesting, always moving on, always changing, and after 2,500 years of history, the problem of interpretation is even greater, because those words that were spoken by the Buddha, they were spoken in a certain context, in a certain culture, so that it was understood in the context of that culture. When those same words are repeated in a different culture to different people with different backgrounds, they will hear something slightly different. Maybe not vastly different, but certainly slightly different, because we use a different language. We have different, different cultural kind of points that we refer to, and for that reason, it's going to be even more difficult to make sure that we actually understand exactly the word of the Buddha. So we have to keep all of these things in mind, and when we do that, we can actually be realistic about what it is that we are hearing when we hear the word of the Buddha. So for this reason, it is very easy to show flaws, for instance, in Goenka's teachings. Goenka's teachings, or any other teaching, this is not specifically really about Goenka as such, any teaching, is going to be a particular interpretation of those suttas, and it will always be limited to a certain extent. So just because we can point out flaws in someone's teaching does not mean that that person is evil, or they have kind of, got it completely wrong, or they should be dismissed or anything like that. It just means that there's always going to be flaws, and we should always try to, find what is the closest to the meaning of the word of the Buddha at any particular time. So it's important to be able to be open about those flaws and not think that that means that these teachers should be dismissed as hopeless or bad or whatever. It is part of an ongoing conversation, about the teaching of the Buddha. And what is interesting is that one of the things that we need to remember is that every generation of people have their own cultural conditioning, depending on what are the important things at that particular times. The modern culture, obviously the internet and social media, etc., becoming more and more important, and they kind of maybe have to read the Buddhist teachings through those eyes. And so every generation, in a sense, has new problems, new things to deal with, new things that they need to react to. And so every generation needs to interpret the teachings maybe in a slightly different way, leaning heavily on the past, trying to understand the discussions of the past, but also renewing the teachings a little bit. So we should never really be afraid when the next generation comes up and says, those monks, Bodhidharma, what did they understand? They didn't really get it at all. And that's okay, it's fine, because they then interpret things in their new way. Hopefully they will take away some of the message, but some of it they might reject, and that's perfectly okay. In the same way that we say, we find certain flaws in the teachings of the past. We need to remember that the way that Goenka taught also arose in a certain cultural context. And those teachings are not free of that context. It's impossible that they should be the pristine teachings from the time of the Buddha. It cannot be. They arose because of that history in Burma and what happened in Burma. And in that context you can understand why someone like Goenka taught the way he taught. Anyone who tries will find flaws in what I say too. It will have its own limitations and its own kind of, it's not because I try to deceive you. I promise I'm not trying to deceive you. Do you believe me? I'm trying my best to present the teachings as I see them, but it's inherent to the whole topic that there will be a certain way of presenting it. My teacher is Ajahn Brahmali, so because of that I will have been brainwashed by Ajahn Brahmali. So what I say is just kind of regurgitating, the Ajahn Brahmali, the Ajahn Brahmavada, the doctrine of Ajahn Brahmali is kind of coming out from me here. So there will be flaws in what I say. And so then what do we do when we have all of these it sounds like it is hopeless, but it's not really hopeless at all, because we only need to get close enough to the Buddhist teachings to enable us to practice properly, And that's really all we're looking for. We don't need to get all the details right, but if we have a good idea of what the Noble Eightfold Path is, then we will be fine. And I have no doubt myself that these teachings are plenty close enough to the word of the Buddha to enable us in the present day to practice these teachings in a perfectly valid way. And and that is really what matters. And if we can do that, then we will keep the Buddhist teachings alive for the future. And we should not be afraid of looking at the past and seeing the flaws, because this is part of moving forward in the world, always being with an open mind, with a heart of kindness, not in a critical way, not in a fundamentalist way, but knowing, understanding that there's always distortions creeping in. And for that reason, we have to kind of have that critique, if you like, of earlier generations. And one of the really important critiques has been recently, Satipatthana is not the same as Vipassana. It is a very, very important and fundamental point because it takes away this whole idea that samadhi is actually what Satipatthana really is trying to get at, and the importance of samadhi on the Buddhist path. Let's do a little bit of meditation again here. Okay, so any comments on what we have just looked at?
Got a question from online, Ajahn,
Mm-hmm.
from Yong Jen An. Bhante, can we say that Satipatthana, only the sense of anapanasati leads to samadhi/jhana, but the rest is more for liberating insight?
The question is, how much rest is there? Because I think when we talk about anapanasati, we're actually talking about the whole of Satipatthana, and the whole thing is really included within the mindfulness of breathing. Yeah? Anapanasati being mindfulness of breathing. Yeah? So you don't really need anything apart from anapanasati. Yeah? And this is actually specifically stated by the Buddha in the Anapanasati Sutta. He says that you complete and fulfill all the four Satipatthanas simply by watching the breath, being aware of the breath. There's a little bit of addition to that. There is, for example, the 31 parts of the body. One of the fundamental aspects of the Kaya Nupassana, the body contemplation, comes on top of that. But that is also like a samatha practice, a calming practice, because the 31 parts of the body is all about reducing the defilements of the mind. Yeah, it is about using the the aspects of the body that are not beautiful to remind yourself of the nature of the body, and then overcome any attachments or defilements you have in that respect. So that too is really a samatha practice. You have the four elements contemplation, which is similar. It's about seeing the body as something neutral, something uninteresting, no different from the things around us. It's all very part of the same thing. Yeah? And so I don't really think that there is any element of Satipatthana which is different from anapanasati. The other point here is that the point I was trying to make is that samatha and vipassana always go together. So even if anapanasati leads to samatha, to calm, it also leads to vipassana. Because when you have samatha, when you have calm, you also see more clearly. So these things cannot be distinguished. To say that anapanasati only leads to samadhi is also not correct. Vipassana and samatha always go together. So watching the breath is not purely for samatha, it is also leads to vipassana down the track. Yeah? So once you understand that calm and clear seeing go together, then anything that leads to calm, anything that leads to clear seeing, also leads to the opposite quality. If your practice leads to calm, it will lead to clear seeing. If it leads to clear seeing, it will also lead to calm. It's true that, as Robin said, there is a sutta in the Anguttara 4s, that's called, I think it's called the Ananda Sutta, Anguttara 4s 185 or something like that, where it talks about doing one before the other one, but it's a relative thing. Yeah? It's a relative focus. You focus on one, and it brings the other quality with it as you do it. And I will explain next time why that has to be the case, why it is impossible to separate these things completely. Yeah? Please. Yeah. You are first, yeah?
So I only have a comment. I did go to Goenka 2 years ago.
Okay.
And what I want to say is I'm here now.
Yeah.
And I do think he does a good thing because I'm here.
Yeah.
And it is I was unsatisfied with his teaching after a while. So I really appreciate these things that you're telling us. He did say that Vipassana was the same as
Satipatthana.
Correct.
Yeah.
And he didn't delineate these things very carefully. But somehow I think it was the crash course kind of thing. And I would say he's a bit harsh as well.
Yeah.
He wasn't as kind as you guys.
Okay. No, thank you for that. I think that's a very valuable comment, and it's and indeed that's what I want to avoid. I want to avoid disparaging people because really everyone brings a little bit something extra, something to the Dhamma. And as you say, Goenka, some people stay with the Goenka and they benefit from that. Some start with the Goenka and then they kind of do something else later on. We have many monks in our monastery who started out also as Goenka practitioners. There's lots of them. So I think, so it's not, we should find that right balance. I fully agree with you. Yes?
I'm just wondering, when you showed the right view, in previous slide, you had anatta and anicca,
Yeah.
but dukkha was missed out. So I'm wondering, even with Vipassana, my own practice is that when you have stillness of mind, being lay people, we can't go straight to jhana. So if you were to investigate, like the Lord Buddha says, don't take my teachings as they're written, you go find and investigate for yourself. So when you investigate, when you get some level of calmness, that insight arises. So it doesn't mean that you have to get the jhana to get insight. And that insight then increases again your mindfulness and your concentration. So it is something that can be developed little by little, even at the outset. It doesn't have to be, because I think and this is not a criticism about the samadhi practice, but there's always a lot of discussion about jhana. And for us, whether it's our morality or purity not quite hitting the mark, it's very difficult to get to a jhanic state. So that insight becomes a little bit easier to find the insight, and then you get drawn in because you get the more mindfulness, the view clarifies a little bit more. Can you comment on that?
Absolutely, of course I can, No, that's exactly right, and that's what I meant by samatha and vipassana always going together. If you get a little bit more calm, you will have a little bit more clear seeing. Clear seeing is my translation here for vipassana rather than insight, and I will explain next time why I do that. So you're quite right. If you have a little bit more calm, you know a little bit more about where to find happiness, because you can see that the calm mind is something very beautiful and very attractive, whereas the mind which is not calm, there's much more dukkha and suffering involved. So you understand something about dukkha and happiness simply by accessing the calm mind. And the same for anicca and anatta. So there is some degree of insight there. But the point is, and this is kind of the important point, is that for the real insight that you want down the track is a real into the nature of reality in a deep level. And that can only be had after samadhi. And this is one of those kind of basic teachings that you find everywhere in the sutta. So what that means is that Satipatthana, until you reach samadhi, should be focused on attaining samadhi. That includes both a clear seeing aspect and the samatha aspect, to get to that point. And then after samadhi, that is where the Satipatthana becomes about the real profound insights. So one is moving towards samadhi, and then the next one is moving towards insights, the real insights on the path. Do you need jhana? Well, don't worry about whether you need jhana. Just to follow the Eightfold Path and see what happens. And if you attain it without jhana, great. If you don't attain the jhana, carry on practicing in that way. It's not something that is really useful to answer beforehand, I think.
Ajahn, there's one more question from online. From Felix Yap. Bhante, how does the fourth tetrad of Anapanasati, the reflections on anicca, viraga, nirodha, and patinisaga, fulfill the fourth Satipatthana of Dhamma phenomenal, the bojjhanga?
Okay. We're going to get to all of these things later on, because I'm going to talk about these things in detail. But the way that works is that if you look at the contemplation of the nivaranas, which are the 5 hindrances, and the bojjhangas, which are the 7 factors of awakening, if you look at the way they are described in the Satipatthana Sutta, they are described in the trying to understand, first of all, what they are as qualities, how they arise, in other words, the qualities that make them come into existence, and then how you kind of sustain them. And this whole idea of conditionality, understanding the conditionality, is very similar to what you try to do when you come to the last tetrad of Anapanasati, which is also about conditionality. It's about impermanence, about fading away, about cessation. There's a slight different emphasis, because in the Anapanasati Sutta, the emphasis is more on real deep insight. In the Satipatthana Sutta, it's more about particular qualities of mind. But it's a similar kind of thing, yeah, about understanding. It's all leaning towards insight, if you like, in one way or another one. But in Anapanasati, it's a bit more profound, probably. And so there is a relation, but not an absolute equality between the two, I would say, in that case. But we'll come back to that later on, and we will discuss it in more detail. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so Satipatthana is mindfulness meditation here. So this is Satipatthana. Mindfulness meditation is a translation used by Bhante Sujata. So he'd probably be horrified that I put this up as a myth. He would probably hope he isn't listening to this course. He might get an email coming in straight away saying. But the reason, I think there are very interesting reasons why he translates in this way, and the idea is simply to make it very clear that meditation should always have mindfulness with it. That's probably why he translates it in this way. But at the same time, I think that there is a downside with that, yeah? Because is there any meditation at all without mindfulness? If you haven't got mindfulness, can you call it meditation? And the answer is no. Yeah, if you haven't got mindfulness, it's not meditation. The whole point of the Anapanasati Sutta is to establish mindfulness, presence, so that you actually can follow the meditation. Otherwise, you can't really do meditation. So I think that is the downside of the idea of mindfulness meditation. It sort of sounds as if there is some meditation which does not have mindfulness. Yeah. And but really, in Buddhism, there's no such thing as meditation without mindfulness. So maybe we should go quickly before he kind of gets a hint. Move on. So maybe we should actually allow him to kind of come back. Maybe he has some. I'm sure he has something more to say about this. I'd be very surprised if Bhante Sujata has more to add. So I just wanted to bring that up, just to make it very clear. No meditation without mindfulness. Now we come to one that we also discussed last time a little bit. I want to discuss it maybe just a little bit more, because I think it is an important issue. And this is the idea that Satipatthana is choiceless awareness of the present moment. And this is something quite common that you will see. If you Google on these sort of things, you will find that Satipatthana is expressed in similar wording, sometimes non-judgmental awareness of the present moment, and sometimes it's expanded into this long line. People come up with their own favorite definitions of what Satipatthana is. But it is problematic. Yeah, it is problematic for a number of reasons. But first of all, where does this come from? And where these ideas come from, they often come from later developments in Buddhism. There is some tiny bit of evidence for this sort of thing in the suttas, but it's only very small, and it does not really fit with the main idea of Satipatthana. So this is an example of where later developments have kind of infiltrated back and become part of the modern understanding of what Satipatthana is about. And there's two reasons, like I mentioned last time, why this is problematic. And the first one is really choiceless. The Satipatthana practice is not really choiceless. Choiceless implies that you're just sitting back and allowing everything to come and go as you see fit. That's really what choiceless means. But really, all meditation practice, especially in Satipatthana, when we're talking about anapanasati, watching the breath, is not choiceless. It's directing the mind to a specific object. So when you decide on your meditation object, decide what you're going to do. There is choice. It's not choice. You decide what you're going to do. I'm going to do metta meditation. I'm going to do anapanasati. I'm going to do recollection of the qualities of the Buddha. All of these are meditation subjects, and they all involve choice. They involve directing the mind in a certain way. When you attend to your subject or meditation, whatever it is, there's also a choice. You are intending in a certain way. It's not a choiceless awareness. It is a practice that is directed again towards the object, and if the mind strays from the object, well, you bring it back again. So again, the idea of choiceless is not really, it doesn't really fit with how this practice works. Even when you do a contemplation, let's say that you finish your anapanasati and you gain a state of calm, and then you contemplate what you have been doing, again, it is an active direction of the mind towards the object of contemplation. So, generally speaking, meditation practice, especially Satipatthana, where we are doing that leads to samadhi practice, is about choosing the object and choosing the subject that you want to attend to. And it's not really a choiceless meditation as such. There is a few instances in the suttas where they seem to talk about what is called a choiceless meditation, and it's called the undirected meditation in the suttas. And this will be meditation that happens after you attain samadhi, when the mind is very peaceful, when the hindrances and the defilements of the mind have been subdued, are really subdued and not really active, and when the mind is very able to kind of stay with whatever, and then that can become an insight practice in its own right. But that only works when the mind is very, very peaceful, usually after samadhi practice. And maybe if we have time, we can have a look at that sutta later on to see how it actually works. And the way it works, just to give you an idea, is that then as you attend to something with an undirected mind, then very often there will be things coming up. You might get sidetracked, or you might get some kind of bit tired or a bit restless or whatever. And the moment you find that you are no longer able to stay with that object, you find that you are deviating a little bit, you bring it back to an object which is inspiring. So you bring it back to the breath, you bring it back to whatever. So the moment you lose your samadhi, the moment you lose your purity of mind, you bring it back to a ordinary meditation object. This is found, if you want to look it up, it's found in the, it's called the Bhikkhunu Passaya Sutta, something like that. It's in the Satipatthana Samyutta, the 10th sutta in the Satipatthana Samyutta. So, choiceless meditation is mostly a later development, maybe coming through Zen meditation, that sort of thing. This is the problem in the modern world. Buddhism tends to be very mixed up. It is mixed up. People often have no idea whether they are quoting late teachings that have come around very recently, or whether they are medieval teachings, or whether they are the word of the Buddha. People often don't know, and they kind of mix it all together, they stir it up, and they kind of serve it out. This is the teaching of the Buddha. Actually, maybe not. You have to be careful. I remember it was very interesting. A few years ago, we had the global conference on Buddhism. We had it down at the what's it called, the exhibition center down in Perth. Convention center, convention and exhibition, whatever it is. And I remember what was very fascinating to see was that we had all of these various speakers from various countries and from various traditions or whatever. And almost in every speech, someone would quote the Buddha. And I think I was the last person to speak on that conference, so I gave a kind of very brief talk. And one of the points I made, because I noticed this, everyone was quoting the Buddha. And I said at my last speaker, well, I saw all these quotes from the Buddha, and I realized not one of them, not a single one of them, was an authentic quote from the Buddha. Isn't that kind of fascinating? I found that really extraordinary. In other words, we don't know. Nobody really understands that there is a distinction to be had between an authentic word of the Buddha and later tradition. That seems to have the vast majority of people, it has bypassed them completely, that there actually is such a distinction to be made. And everything really becomes the word of the Buddha, and nothing becomes the word of the Buddha for exactly the same reason. So that distinction really matters. And there is a website called Fake Buddha Quotes. Yeah, check it out. And this is a fellow who does exactly this. He does investigation. Yeah, he takes quotes that are supposedly the word of the Buddha from wherever he gets them, and then he checks them out. Are they actually words of the Buddha? And then he kind of splashes fake onto that quote. Yeah, and there are so many fake Buddha quotes that supposedly are the word of the Buddha, but actually turn out to be false. So this is one of the reasons why we do these kind of things, like the early Buddhist texts, to kind of get to the source of things and to see what's going on here. So there is choice, usually in Buddhism. Yeah, the idea of choiceless awareness is not really what Satipatthana is about. And then there's the other aspect of this, which I also mentioned last time, and I just want to maybe mention it briefly again. And this is the idea of the present moment, choiceless awareness of the present moment. The problem is that in the suttas, you do find the word present, but you don't really find the word moment used in this way. There is the word moment, but it's used in different contexts, not in the context of meditation practice. And this word moment is a word that really is taken from the Abhidhamma. And in the Abhidhamma, remember the Abhidhamma, the purpose of the Abhidhamma is a philosophical treatise. And the purpose of it is to crystallize things, things that may be uncertain in the suttas. It is to create a system of understanding which is complete. The problem with the suttas is that often they leave little gaps here and there. It is not a complete philosophical system. Why? Because it's not meant to be a complete philosophical system. That is not what the Buddha is about. Buddha's purpose is to find a path to liberation from suffering, not to create a philosophy. And I think the Buddha did that on purpose. Yeah, he specifically says, you may remember the very famous simile of the Buddha, where he takes the handful of leaves in the Gosinga wood, and he says to the monks, what is more, the leaves in my hand, or the leaves in all the trees overhead? It's pretty obvious. Well, Venerable, we think the leaves in your hand are less, or something. I can't remember exactly what the monk said, but it's kind of, the answer is very obvious. And the Buddha says, in exactly the same way, what I have taught you is what similar to the leaves in my hand, and what I haven't is similar to the leaves overhead. So it's vastly, vastly more. And the point is that you only teach that which actually leads to awakening, and the rest is just philosophy, and it's not important for the practice. And then the Abhidhammikas come, the people who want to build up the Abhidhamma, they want to fill in all the gaps, they want to create a complete philosophical system, missing the point that the Buddha deliberately did not teach a philosophical system, missing that point and then creating the Abhidhamma. And that is where the idea of momentariness comes from. And so the Abhidhamma, first of all, it takes the phenomena of the world and it divides it up into a complete system of phenomena. Yeah, so it has all the different mind moments. It has the different aspects of the material world, materiality, and it makes a complete system out of the mind and the material world. So that is kind of the phenomenal existence. And then it takes the time dimension of existence and divides that up into discrete moments. So every moment is like a discrete time of existence. Yeah? And this is called the Kanikavada doctrine of momentariness, which is what you find in the Abhidhamma, especially in the Abhidhamma commentaries, is where this is spelled out, and is also found in the Visuddhimagga in part. So this is a result of the method of the Abhidhamma, which is to present a philosophical system, and they want a final, complete description of reality. This is where the idea of moments come from. And you get things like the Chittavitti, which is the sequence of mind moments, which occurs, when you use the mind and when we experience the world. There's a particular sequence that is kind of set out in the Abhidhamma commentaries. It comes from all of that. And then, of course, it comes back into our ordinary discourse. And we start to talk about things in terms of present moment, Why? Well, because we use the ideas from later Buddhism. We import them back into the way we talk about meditation practice, and it becomes part of that discourse. But the suttas only have the idea of present. Pachupanna, it is called in the suttas. The suttas talk about the 3 times, the atita, which is the past, the anagata, which is the future. Anagata literally means not come. And then the pachupanna, which means the arisen, in other words, that which is present now. So it's not momentariness, it's just presence. And that is different. Something being present and something being momentary is not the same, because momentary kind of gives the idea that something is kind of coming and going all the time. But that's not really how the suttas work. So in the suttas, there is change, but not in the momentary sense. In the suttas, the change is rather you go from one sense to another sense. You have in the suttas, you have the idea of contact, passa. This is what we find in dependent origination. And from passa, first of all, you have the salayatana, the 6 sense bases. Because you have the 6 sense bases, you then have passa, and then you feel the word according to where that contact happens. And then when you have a different sense base, you have a different passa. And so things cease and come into existence. And this can happen very, very fast, almost as if it is momentary. But it's not the same, because in the suttas, it can persist over certain amounts of time. It is not momentary quite in that sense. So for example, you can have a jhana experience that can last for hours, or last for long, long periods of time. And it is not momentary in the same way as it is explained in the suttas. And even a sense experience can last more than a moment. So it is a slightly different way of thinking about things. Does it matter? And it can matter, and the reason why it can matter is because we tend to see, once we have an idea of things, once we have a certain philosophy of things, we tend to look for those things, and we tend to see what we are looking for. So we have to be careful so we don't see momentariness when maybe there isn't any momentariness, because we tend to create the realities as we understand them beforehand. So this is what it looks like in the suttas. There is the arising, the vanishing, and change while persisting. Instead of momentariness, you have phenomena that come into being, and after they come into being, they exist, and while they exist, they are kind of changing even while they're existing, and then they vanish afterwards. This is from the Kanda Sangyutta, 22nd Sangyutta of the Sangyutta Nikaya. And so this is a slightly different way of looking at things, because it's not just arising and ceasing, momentary one after the other. There is obviously a certain persistence there in these mind moments that last for a while, these experiences that we have. So present moment is something that I think we should ideally not use when we talk about meditation practice. We should talk about the present, about presence, and that presence can even last over long periods of time, and you will find that it's always changing, but it's not momentary in this particular sense. So that is the idea of what is it again? The idea of a present moment awareness, a choiceless present moment awareness, which is this is again a later concept that has kind of crept into Buddhist ideas, and it's not really very precise description of what is going on in Buddhist meditation here. Does anybody want to say anything about that? Any comments on this? Yes, please.
It's a stream of consciousness. Isn't that like arising and passing,
even quicker than a moment?
It is arising and passing away, but it's a stream in the sense the stream does not necessarily mean moment to moment, but it can also mean just one sense and then another sense, and then another sense, but not necessarily momentary. It is the stream can sometimes can kind of last for a while. Like for example, if you go into a state of samadhi, it will stay for a long time, without really any change being discernible. And then when you come out of samadhi, then the senses will arise again, and it will move from sense to sense, but not usually in the momentary sense in the way it is described in the Abhidhamma, more in the sense of arising, changing, then disappearing. It's not quite as, in my understanding, it is not the way it is described in the sutras does not really fit totally with the way it is described in the Abhidhamma.
Like even when you're listening to someone speaking,
yeah,
the words appear and disappear.
Yeah.
Isn't that also like the arising and vanishing?
That is, well, yes, it is. That's the change while persisting. Yeah. So if you are listening all the time and you're kind of attuned to that, actually, what is happening there is that there is a kind of the movement between the hearing and the mind. The mind is what makes sense of what you're hearing here. So there will be a rapid movement between mind and hearing in that particular case. So the mind will apprehend what you're hearing, and then the hearing will hear some more, and the mind will apprehend it. There will be very quick movement between the two. And so yes, and then there will be your understanding, which will be continuously moving as well. That is change while persisting sometimes. So that there is a flow of consciousness, but the flow of consciousness is, I would say the flow is more like this than it is very, very absolutely momentary. For most people, it doesn't make much difference. Yeah, you will not notice very much distinction. But sometimes I think it's important to have the framework roughly right. Otherwise, you will actually start to see things which aren't necessarily there. Yeah, and it's better to actually stick to how, in my opinion, better to stick to how it is described in the sutras rather than to go beyond that, because it may lead to a misunderstanding when it comes to insight or meditation practice. Yeah.
Because with anatta, that sort of it gels with anatta. Where there's it's just a constant flow of even sound, sight, everything is just flowing. Yeah.
So the anatta is the idea that it arises and vanishes. That's the idea of anatta. Yeah. It comes into existence and it vanishes completely. Yeah. That's the idea of anatta. But whether that is momentary or it lasts longer does not really make any difference, because it still arises out of nothing and it passes into nothing afterwards. So whether that is 1/1000th of a second or 1/1,000,000th of a second doesn't change the anatta concept. Yeah?
Yeah. It's confusing.
So it is not a super duper important point, but it just shows you how, to my mind, it shows a little bit about how later tradition kind of creeps into how we understand meditation. And in my opinion, it can sometimes be detrimental. That's really what it is about.
Ajahn?
Yeah.
There's one more question.
Oh, yes, please.
So, you said it wasn't a philosophy, but would you agree it's at least Buddhism is at least a philosophy of happiness in a narrow context, not a complete kind of physics theory or something, ontology, philosophy?
Yeah, I would say a philosophy of happiness is really a psychology. Yeah. So I would call Buddhism a particular psychology, a psychology of happiness. That would be my definition of it. Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's just take 5 minutes meditation again here. Okay. So let us carry on. And any more comments on this that we have done so far? Okay, if there are no comments, then we will carry on. Please, yeah.
From the Eightfold Paths, this is the seventh one, the right mindfulness.
Yeah.
So then I see it as a wheel. So you right mindfulness, we do right peacefulness, then it clarifies the view, then it goes around again. So every time the wheel goes around, it's refining, refining, refining.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So then that fits into the Four Noble Truths. Because the Eightfold Path is the fourth noble truth.
Yeah.
So it's to do with suffering. Suffering should be understood.
Yeah.
The cause of suffering has to be known, and then the cessation of the suffering has to be realized.
The cause of suffering has to be abandoned.
Abandoned.
Yeah, yeah.
So the cause of suffering is the attachment to desire. What's the difference between the desire and the attachment to desire?
The cause of suffering is the desire, which is, it's not attachment to desire, it is either desire or attachment. There are two aspects of the same thing here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm clarifying. So it's not the attachment to desire. So if you have a desire to eat,
yeah,
you do that out of wisdom and compassion for yourself, or you?
It depends what kind of desire it is. I mean, there's some desire to eat is kind of necessary, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So some desire to eating is good, it's like it's natural, but there's also that desire which kind of is just indulgence. There's a difference there between the kind of desire which is required to survive, and then there's the indulgence. And indulgence is really the kind of the main problem here. The indulgence in that sensory world, because when you indulge, that's where you also get attached, because you give these things a lot of meaning in your life. I mean, there is maybe some problem with ordinary desire as well, but it's a much lesser one. It's the indulgence which is the main thing you want to avoid.
So I'm going to take it back to Abhidhamma and the seven factors.
Yeah.
So the Abhidhamma says the place where you can cut it is the feeling, and pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. So is it the idea of equanimity coming in, saying?
Yeah, well, this is something that we talked about in the dependent origination course we did before, and the idea that you can cut it between feeling and craving is, in my opinion, is a misunderstanding of dependent origination. You can't cut it there. What you can do, you can reduce it there, and that is what sense restraint is about. We talked about sense restraint, right effort before. And when by reducing it, you are learning how to deal with your feelings without allowing it to give rise to craving. And that can be craving in forms of ill will, aversion towards the thing, or craving in forms of desire to attain it. So you deal with the craving, and when you deal with those feelings in the right way, it doesn't give rise to craving. That's when meditation becomes possible. And then through the process of meditation, you eventually, what you abandon is ignorance, which is the very first factor of the path. That's where the real cutting happens, at the point of ignorance. The link between feeling and craving is really just more like a reduction. You bring it down to a level where you can, where your mind becomes peaceful and you can practice properly.
So the ignorance then refers to the three characteristics.
Yeah.
So once you know that things are impermanent, non-self, and suffering, you are no longer interested in that. You're more still.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very,
Yeah. Thank you.
Something like that. Yeah.
Oh, Ajahn Brahmali, just quickly,
Yo.
It's just following up to what this lady says about desire, Desire brings suffering, okay? Generally, it's thought that desire brings suffering, But the Buddha did say too, If you desire brings suffering, if you don't get the desire, also suffering. So it's the middle way. That's my understanding.
If you don't get your desire, it's also suffering. Yeah. Well, that's why suffering is desire, right? That's why desire is suffering. Yeah.
That's the middle way, isn't it? That's my understanding. I might be,
Well, desire is suffering precisely because you often don't get it. Yeah, that's exactly why it is.
Yeah,
suffering.
you get it. It brings suffering, okay? But if you don't get the desire, it's also suffering.
More suffering, yeah.
Yeah, so it's the middle way.
Yeah, so desire is suffering. Not getting what you desire is suffering.
It's also,
getting what you desire is also suffering sometimes.
Yeah, so it's the middle way.
Everything is suffering here. Yeah.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
And that's the whole mess of suffering, isn't it, Ajahn? There is a question very quickly from Yong Jiang An. I think addressing the comment, the thing on the slide, the idea of a present moment is from the Abhidhamma. So the question is, Bhante, perhaps we can put aside Abhidhamma or not. Present moment simply means we focus on what we are doing now, not distracted by thoughts.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. But that's why the word moment is really not necessary. That's why the word moment can be taken out, and we can just call it the present. Because the idea of moment kind of brings us back to the Abhidhamma almost automatically, because it kind of assumes that there is a very strict momentariness to experience, which actually is not necessarily the case. That momentariness may not actually be there. Yes, things come, things go, things arise, they vanish, there is change while they are persisting. But the idea of momentariness is actually something which is misleading. It's not a word that you find in the suttas used in this particular context. So that's why I prefer not to use it. So for example, if you take the present case, the Abhidhamma would say that the arising, changing while persisting, and the vanishing, this whole sequence can be divided up into moments, sub-moments, where one is the moment of arising, and then each change while it persisting is itself a moment, so it divides this up so as to fit into the Abhidhamma system, whereas the suttas don't speak about it that way. They just talk about something arising, changing while it is there, and then passing away. It's a different kind of outlook. And I think all of this, we may be getting bogged down into things that are getting too theoretical. The only reason I'm bringing it up is because our philosophy tends to influence the way we experience meditation. So I'm just concerned about, we don't want to learn to experience something which actually doesn't exist. And this is kind of a part of the problem here. But for most of us, it is not really an issue. For most of us, you just meditate, you enjoy being with the breath, and these kind of ideas may never actually come up in your practice at all. So don't think too much about this, because I think it actually is probably a sidetrack for the vast majority of us. Yeah, yes, no, maybe. Good, bad, who knows? Okay, shall we carry on? Yeah, anyone who does not want to carry on? Anyone? Let's go on to the last two myths of the day. I think there's only two left. Myth number 9, Satipatthana, is bare attention. This is another one of those kind of words that you will hear a lot, bare awareness or bare attention. Ajahn Brahm has a book out called Bare Awareness. Have you seen that? B-E-A-R, bare awareness. Has a nice picture of Ajahn Brahm on the cover holding a teddy bear, which is good. So Satipatthana is bare attention or bare awareness. And this too can be misleading if it is misunderstood. Maybe there is a way in which Satipatthana is bare attention, but it may not be the way that you think it is. I usually what I do, I go to the monastery and I say something controversial to Ajahn Brahm and then see what the response is. That's always a very kind of, if you want to kind of get something interesting out of Ajahn Brahm, you say something controversial. Ajahn Brahm, I've just heard this. What do you think about this? And that's kind of when he kind of counters it. So what is the problem with this? So in the popular understanding, mindfulness has developed into a practice of bare awareness to calm the mind. This is from Wikipedia. So if it is in Wikipedia, then usually that is kind of popular understanding. It's kind of almost the definition of popular understanding if it is in the Wikipedia. Yeah, so again, the idea of bare awareness is also sometimes comes from a later ideas in Buddhism. And is it found in the sutras? Maybe, but in a very kind of restricted sense. Bare attention is the clear and single-minded awareness of what actually happens to us and in us in the successive moments of perception. Again, you have this idea of momentariness, yeah, that kind of creeps in everywhere. And again, it is fascinating how these later ideas in Buddhism really kind of take over the way we talk about Buddhism and meditation practice. It is called bare because it attends just to the bare facts of perception as presented either through the five physical senses or through the mind. The bare facts of perception. So, what does that mean, the bare facts of perception? Is there such a thing as a bare fact of perception? Or is all perception conditioned and biased in a certain way? Well, that is really the question here. What does it mean when we talk about bare awareness? What's happening next here? Well, here's another definition. Yeah, when attending to the sixfold sense impression, attention or mindfulness is kept to a bare registering of the facts observed without reacting to them by deed, speech, or mental comment, which may be one of self-reference, like or dislike, etc., judgment or reflection. And this again is by Nyanaponika Thera, that monks we talked about before. And this is from his book, a famous book on meditation, which I can't remember the exact title of the book now, but it doesn't really matter. So again, this idea of bare registering of the facts. Yeah. So what we need to be able to understand this, we have to ask ourselves the question, well, what does bare actually mean? Bare in what sense? Bare of what? What is it that we have taken away? And there's many ways to understand the idea of bare, and one of the ways of thinking about bare awareness is the idea that awareness can exist completely by itself, as in consciousness existing without any other content except for awareness. And this is a very common understanding. Yeah, if you read a little bit about contemporary meditation teachers or whatever, the idea of bare consciousness, consciousness without any other mental faculties or any other mental factors, is actually something that people talk about very often. But in the sutras, there is no such thing. It is impossible to have just pure consciousness without any content in that consciousness. There's always going to be something you are aware of. Awareness always comes with an object, something that is there. It cannot exist as a perfectly independent entity without some kind of object. So even in very deep samadhi experience, there will be some kind of perception. Yeah, there will be like infinite consciousness or infinite space, or there will even be nothingness. Yeah, nothingness is itself a perception. It's something that you perceive, and there will be some kind of felt experience about it. And if there's no other experience, it will be a neutral experience, a neutral feeling, known as adukkama sukha in the Pali, neither painful nor pleasant. It's neutral. And you may wonder, how can it be a feeling if it's neutral? Well, the reason it is a feeling is because it's attractive. Yeah, you know that this is an attractive perception, and that sense of the fact that it attracts, you're attracted to it, that is what is the feeling in that particular case. But it's neutral because it's neither pleasant nor painful. So this is one of the first missteps that you make, is that if you think of bare awareness, it cannot mean consciousness by itself. Yeah? And this is kind of one of the very common mistakes that you find in Buddhist discourse and Buddhist discussions. So if it doesn't mean bare of that, what else can it be bare of? Yeah, and one of the things that it could be bare of is maybe the will, that you are aware without, like we said before, you are choiceless. You don't will anything, you're not intending in a certain direction. So in that sense, you can just be aware. Just whatever comes in is what you are aware of. But as we have seen, that doesn't work either, because attention, especially when we use it in Satipatthana, does actually involve a certain degree of intention. It's not choiceless. You are directing your mind in a certain way, so it is not bare of intention or choice. This is also part of that awareness. So what then is it bare of? And I asked Ajahn Brahm, well, what bare attention? What is it bare of? Ajahn Brahm said the 5 hindrances. It's kind of nice, yeah. And of course that is true, right? It is supposed to be bare of the 5 hindrances. And I thought that was a very good answer. But it's not what is meant usually. It's not what people mean when they say bare awareness, bare of the 5 hindrances. But that would be an appropriate answer. So what is usually meant by bare awareness is this. It is bare of proliferation, the tendency to get involved with things through craving, self, and views. This is usually what is meant by bare awareness. But these are some of the most deep-seated cognitive biases, if you like, in the human being. The idea of craving a sense of self, and views. And in Satipatthana meditation, we haven't dealt with these things yet. There's still going to be the underlying idea of a self is going to be there, underlying cravings are going to be there, underlying views are going to be there. These things are really only abandoned once you become an Arya, once you become a noble person, is when you start getting rid of these things completely. So in Satipatthana meditation, you will partially abandon the proliferation because the mind is going to be calm, it's going to be quite peaceful. There's not going to be a lot of proliferation going on, but it will still underlie the experience to some extent. You will still interpret what is there in terms of a self, in terms of views about existence and all of these kind of things. Why? Well, because this is the tendency of the human mind. These are precisely the things that we want to get insight into after samadhi, not before samadhi, because these are the things that are so difficult to uncover. So this is what is meant, but it doesn't fit with the idea of Satipatthana practice, at least not in its initial usage to attain samadhi, because it is just too profound for that part of Satipatthana practice. But, and this is what I will argue or discuss a little bit later on, maybe next time or whenever it comes up, is that Satipatthana after samadhi, after you've had a deep state of meditation or whatever, then when the mind is very pure, very clear, and you have abandoned a lot of these proliferating tendencies, at that point you're getting close to this idea of bare awareness, where there's very little sense of self left. Craving is completely gone, your views, etc., are at least subdued. At that point, you have an ability to have awareness which approximates to this. And actually, that's where probably you get the closest. So be careful with these ideas of bare awareness. You need to inquire a little bit. What does it actually mean? When we use the word bare, of what is it actually meant to be bare? Because without getting a clear definition of these things, it can be very confusing, it can be very misleading when we think about it in the wrong way. I like the idea of bare of the 5 hindrances. I thought that was a really cool answer. So that's kind of, we can stick to that one for sure. So at best after samadhi, that's what I was just saying. So, bare awareness. You can see how these things are not entirely wrong, or entirely a misconception or whatever, but they kind of had to just be defined quite clearly before we can actually make any real sense of them, what they actually mean. So, what do you think? Good, bad? It makes sense? Yeah? Okay. Good. Any questions about this before we move on to the last myth of the day? Yes.
2 weeks ago I learned the Five Condors, and the fifth one is, I think, consciousness. And how does that relate to this bear? Is it the same thing that you're talking about?
Yeah, awareness and consciousness are really two aspects of the same idea. Consciousness is the thing which is aware, through which awareness happens.
So if you don't have anything, all you're left with is the consciousness.
You can't just have consciousness. It cannot exist by itself. It has to have you have to be conscious of something. Otherwise, there is no consciousness.
So, in the fifth khandha, the other four things are present in the fifth one.
At the minimum, there's always three khandhas present: consciousness, perception, and feeling. Yeah, that's the kind of minimum requirement.
Okay, so this is a little bit more refined. There's more things. It's a more complex thing that is being eliminated.
This is even more complex. Yeah. So yeah. Ananda.
Thanks, Ajahn. That question on that, is it Namarupa, complete Namarupa a requirement for consciousness?
You can have consciousness without rupa, but nama is a kind of, you have to at least nama. Is
so
possible.
All the five components of the nama is a requirement. That is Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Passa, and Manasikara.
Yeah, all of those have to be at any particular time.
For consciousness.
Yeah, because Sanya, Vedana, Passa, Sankara. Which was the last one? I forgot.
Manasikara.
Manasikara, Passa, Chetana.
Yeah, Manasanchetana.
Yeah, well, whether Chetana has to be present, that is a kind of a... it is uncertain. It is not entirely clear, because there will be states of consciousness where where the mind is not kind of willing anything or doing anything. And so you could... one of the arguments is that at that point the Chaitana is like frozen onto the object, or you can say that Chaitana doesn't. I think it's more natural to say Chaitana is not there actually, but at least the four other khandhas. Not four khandhas, four factors of factors. Nama.
Nama. Four factors of the Nama have to be there without Chaitana. Also about, though directly connected, bear of proliferation. So you mentioned that mainly it is after Samadhi, you said that will arise, that will happen. But in that Madhupindika Sutta, proliferation is what it says is the source from which all the identity views arise. So that in that situation it could arise even outside the meditation, outside Samadhi, because it starts with the Chakku, eye consciousness. So when you see a sight, as well, then the proliferation, that is why we are this.
True. It's just that after Samadhi, it's going to be very, very subdued. And it's going to take some time before it re-arises again. And that's why after Samadhi, that's why this is a suitable time to get insight. Because all of these things are subdued, it gives you a chance to see through the problem. Samadhi, Pachaya, or Samadhi is the cause for Yata Bhuta Nanadasana.
So the proliferation exists, becomes very clearer, much clearer after the Samadhi. That's what you are saying.
Exactly. So there's very little happening, very little going on. Okay, so we're coming towards the end. I'll just have a look at the very last of these myths. Misconceptions. Satipatthana is to be practiced without joy or bliss. And this is, again, still, I hear all the time about people who say they come back from meditation retreat and they are taught that joy and happiness and bliss is to be avoided in the meditation practice. And I didn't mention this last time, and I just wanted to kind of show you maybe in a little bit more detail. But this is very, very problematic, because if you avoid joy and bliss, well, first of all, you are avoiding some of the greatest reasons for living the spiritual life. I mean, this is what the spiritual life promises you. It promises you piti, it promises you sukha, it promises you passaddhi, the calm, all of these marvelous things. And if you don't get access to these things that the path is supposed to give you, you're missing out. Yeah, this is kind of the point of the practice, is to move towards these things. This is part and parcel for heading towards awakening. It's part of the joy of meditation. Joy is part of the joy of meditation practice. So this is why we're doing this, and it's kind of crazy to miss out on very profound and beautiful happinesses when they are available to us. Not only available, but the Buddha said we should be doing these things. That's the first reason you're missing out on some of the greatest reasons for meditating. The other reason why it is bad is because if you really want to achieve deep meditation, if you want to access samadhi and you want to act this thing, this is the path. Yeah, you cannot actually access samadhi without joy and bliss. If you look at the standard sequence of dependent liberation, if you look at the 7 bojjhangas, the 7 factors of awakening, it's always the same. Yeah, you start with mindfulness. From mindfulness and sila, you get the pamudja, the gladness, the piti, the pasaddhi, the sukha. Then comes the samadhi. It comes from the bliss, because it is the bliss and happiness that enables you and makes the object so interesting. That is what stabilizes your attention, and that is why samadhi becomes possible. So actually, by not practicing joy and bliss, you're missing out in 2 respects. You're missing out on the great, profound, beautiful aspects of the mind that are available through spiritual practice, and you're missing out on the ability to take the path all the way to the end. So it's kind of tragic. It really is tragic that these things are downplayed on the spiritual path. Yeah, it's really sad, because the purpose of a spiritual path, at least in Buddhism, is because it is going to add quality to our life. It's not about torturing ourselves. Yeah, I must admit, for myself, coming from a background in a Christian society, when you put like a cross with Jesus Christ on a cross, and you compare it to the Buddha sitting serenely with a beautiful smile on its face, it tells you something about the difference in those religions. Yeah, I don't know about you, but the idea of Jesus Christ hanging on a cross, I don't really know how it can be inspiring. To me, it is. Maybe it's inspiring to some people, but to me, it's like, why are we following this religion? Some guy tortured on a cross. Okay, let's put the Buddha in there instead, because the Buddha is happy, the Buddha is smiling. That's what I want to follow. And the only reason why I think we follow Jesus Christ on the cross is because we are used to this idea. We're somehow used to it. I mean, I'm not saying there is many beautiful, good practitioners in Christianity who gain deep, stillness and bliss and all of these kind of things. But some of the symbols, the root symbols of Christianity, to me, are very problematic. And this is exactly what attracts me to Buddhism, that it is about these things, about the happiness, the joy, the peace. And it's symbolized in the beautiful smile on the Buddha's face. Yeah, the Buddha, the whole thing, the whole Buddhist teaching is leaning in that direction. And if we then throw it out, we're starting to make the same mistake that maybe some people do in other religions, and that can be very problematic. So let's enjoy the good things of the spiritual path. Yeah. And so let's just review very briefly how important it actually is, even within Satipatthana practice. So this is from the part of the Satipatthana Sutta that talks about the contemplation of feeling. So when they feel a material pleasant feeling, material means physical, physical pleasant feeling, is known as samisa sukha, they know, I feel a material pleasant feeling. So it's part of the contemplation of feelings. It should, in other words, it should not be rejected. When they feel a spiritual pleasant feeling, the niramisa sukha, they know, I feel a spiritual pleasant feeling. Niramisa sukha, and this is defined elsewhere in the suttas as the the jhana experiences, the deep states of samadhi that are attainable on the path. It is right there. You're supposed to know these things, and the only way you can know them is by experiencing them. So it is part of the Satipatthana Sutta, MN10. You have it right there. So it is not distinct from Satipatthana. So the idea that you should avoid them is very problematic. Maybe I should say a little bit more about that, because very often the argument that is used why you should avoid these happy feelings is the idea that you get attached to them. You get attached to these feelings, and because of that they are dangerous, because once you are attached to them, then you will hold on to them and you can't go beyond them. But it is the wrong way of thinking about the Buddhist teachings, because the point is that as long as you have a sense of self, you will be attached to something. It is not possible to live entirely without attachment as long as you have a sense of self. So the question is not so much whether you're going to be attached to these feelings or not. The question is, if I have to be attached, how can I be attached to something that is useful? That is the right question, because some kind of degree of attachment is required. And it's much better to be attached to something like this, things like that are very, very high on the spiritual path, that are really on the path to awakening, than to be attached to sensory pleasures, be attached to a pizza or relationships or anything like that. It's far superior, because here, at the very least, you are getting very close to the end of the spiritual path. So this is kind of the point. Attachment is not something you can choose away. Attachment is something that will always be there as long as you have a sense of self. So all we can really do is choose our attachment in a strategic way. Choose your attachments wisely. That's really all we can do. So avoiding bliss simply because you might get a bit attached to it is completely the wrong way to go. In fact, the Buddha said we should experience these things, and because he said we should, and they're part and parcel of the path, then obviously we should do it. Then we have the Chitta Nupassana, the contemplation of the mind. You should know expansive mind as expansive mind. This is the Mahagata Chitta. And these again are states of great bliss. When the mind becomes Mahagata, means literally become large, become great. Expansive mind. These are states of samadhi or jhana, states when the mind becomes very peaceful and it feels expansive. It doesn't feel contracted or small. They know mind that is supreme as supreme, anuttara citta. Again, referring to the jhanas. If you look at the commentaries, they say this refers to the jhanas, and that makes very good sense when you know the sutta as well. They know the stilled mind as stilled, samahita citta. This is the mind in samadhi. This is another way of saying samadhi, really. So again, jhanas. They know the freed mind as freed, vimutta citta, as vimutta citta. And vimutta, well, one of the main things that you are freed from is the 5 hindrances. And so vimutta citta also usually refers to jhana states. So all of this is about bliss, powerful bliss sometimes, and it's supposed to be contemplated, and the only way you can contemplate it is by experiencing it. So experiencing these things are absolutely critical and core parts of Satipatthana practice. Then we have the awakening factors. Now we come to the last of the Satipathanas, is the Dhammanupassana, the contemplation of the qualities of mind. So when they have the awakening factor of energy in them, when they have rapture in them, when they have tranquility in them, when they have stillness in them, when they have equanimity in them, they understand, I have the awakening factor of energy, rapture, tranquility, stillness, and equanimity in me. same thing again. All the factors of the samadhi experience are there, and they are to be contemplated and understood, and you have to understand how they arise, how they come into existence, and all of these kind of things. So again, it is kind of fully part of the path to awakening and all the way going to samadhi. Here, you're understanding how samadhi actually comes about in detail, following the path along here. So please remember how core this is to Satipatthana. There's many other ways I could make the same argument. It can be made from many different angles, but here it is actually focusing on the Satipatthana Sutta itself, and seeing that it's integral to the actual Satipatthana Sutta, all of these degrees of happiness and tranquility and stillness, etc. And so enjoy the practice, enjoy the path, because it is meant to be enjoyed, and that is kind of very important part of this. And then you will have so much more fun, and you'll be doing this for so much longer because of all the marvelous things that arise from this, and then you will be on the right track for awakening at the same time. Doesn't get better than that, right? You enjoy it and you're also going towards awakening. Gee, this is really cool stuff. So there's no... sometimes I think we have, as human beings, we have this idea that if you want to reach some deep spiritual truth, it has to be painful. No pain, no gain. I think it's a very deep-seated idea in human beings. But the Buddhist path is almost the opposite. It's like you need happiness to gain even more happiness. And it's such a beautiful idea. It's just when you gain, it's not so much about whether you're happy or not. It's more about understanding the kind of happiness that we should be looking for. You avoid the bad happinesses and you go for the right kind of happinesses. And then you are on the right track. Right kind of happiness leads to even more of the right kind of happiness. So it's, I don't know, it's just such an inspiring thing, this Buddhist path, and so powerful. So I think that is the last slide of this. Oh, the end, okay. And let's not go there quite yet. It's a bit too early to go to that one. So we have 4 minutes left. Would anyone like to comment on this one? Prem, please.
Another one of the references you have given is the sutta from Samyutta Nikaya called Ignorance. Ignorance,
right, yes.
It talks about the negative aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path, starting from the wrong view, etc. Goes down to wrong effort, giving rise to wrong mindfulness, and giving rise to wrong stillness. So can a wrong mindfulness give any stillness? Right or wrong?
So, well, this is an interesting question of interpretation. What is meant by wrong stillness? What is meant by wrong mindfulness and wrong stillness? What is meant by... I think the only way to understand wrong stillness is to understand stillness that has a wrong view coming with it. It is wrong in the sense that if it has wrong view coming with it, you will understand it in the wrong way. You will take that stillness to mean God, to mean something that it actually doesn't mean. Instead of actually using it to reach enlightenment, you will stop at that stillness, and that will be the end of the path for you. So remember that what is called the Arya Samma Samadhi, Noble Right Samadhi, is this right samadhi, the jhana, supported by the 7 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. It has to be supported by the other 7 factors. If it isn't supported by the other 7 factors, it is not called Noble Right Samadhi. One of those factors is right view. So if you come to Samma Samadhi with wrong view, it is not really Samma Samadhi. And that is the problem. So mindfulness would then be something similar, because it comes with wrong view. You may be able to meditate, but what you're looking for is God, or you're looking for that kind of final thing, the kind of something which doesn't fit with the Buddhist outlook of things, and that is where I think it goes wrong.
Ajahn, just one last question from online from Yong Jie An. Material pleasant feeling is of the five senses. It is not really the pleasure encouraged by the Buddha. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. Absolutely. So you should know these things. I didn't really mean to imply that that is something you should experience at that time, but it should be part of your contemplation to understand the problem, of course. Eddie, you want to say something? Yeah? Okay, you've got to be quite quick because we've only got 1 minute left. So,
interesting, Ajahn. You know what is mentioned in the board here is similar to the 7 factors of enlightenment?
That's what it is.
Oh, I thought you said that's like that is...
Yeah. Yeah, it's very similar. It's exactly the same, in fact. Yeah.
Exactly the same, Yeah. So it's the 7 factors of enlightenment, Bojjhangas, it's got healing power,
Yeah.
So it's all healings, isn't it?
Yes.
It helps us in our problem.
Yeah.
Healing,
So that's why we should do it. So that's another
very
reason.
Sure.
Another reason to do it. Yeah.
Because it was mentioned in the suttas that the Buddha was sick, Chunda mentioned it. Recited the Bojjhangas, and he was healed, and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're quite right. Yeah. Okay. So let's just pay respect to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha.